Hello and welcome to the New Gig podcast. I'm your host, Glen Hodgson, and today I'm delighted to be joined by the head of ICMPD's EU-India Cooperation and Dialogue on Migration and Mobility project, as well as Europe-India Top 40 Under 40 leader, Naozad Hodiwala. How are you doing, Naozad?
Good morning, Glenn. I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing well,
quite an
sir.
intro.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, let's start by just you giving a little bit of a background for the viewers and listeners about how you got to be doing what you are today, a little bit about your journey as well.
Gosh, well, it's the easiest way to feel old, isn't it? Reflecting back on how you got to where you did. Essentially, I've been interested in migration ever since the day I was born. I was born to Indian parents in the United Arab Emirates. They had migrated in the hope of a future, a better life, better employment opportunities. And after a certain period of time where we really enjoyed life in the Middle East, my parents looked for greener pastures, wanted to have some permanency, and all the things that we talk about in migration, a certainty in future, having the ability to be able to own and work with the freedom to decide where your future lies and not have to rely on annual visa renewals. Got to my parents and got to my dad, and so he decided that he wanted to move to something more secure, something more brighter for his children and his family. And at the time, in the late 1990s, the only places one could go without an actual concrete job opportunity was Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. And he just felt that Canada was his right place. So we moved to Canada. I got my bachelor and master's degree from the University of British Columbia. Would love to give a shout out to my alma mater there. It's a place that I miss greatly. And then, having started working and studying in political science, the dream of one day being in Europe was the most fascinating part, because Europe at the time was just going through the Tampere and the Maastricht period where, enlargement of the responsibilities of the European Commission. And it just seemed like a very fascinating political experiment. So I ended up being very interested in EU affairs, got a master's degree in European studies, specializing in migration, then got the opportunity to do an internship at the International Organization for Migration, which at the time was based in Vienna, but then I also got a chance to continue that work in Brussels. And that just made me launch off on a journey on migration and migration studies. And after joining ICMPD about what feels like now 7 years ago, it was the perfect fit. EU and India had just signed the Common Agenda on Migration and Mobility in 2016. They were looking for an organization like ICMPD to facilitate the dialogue between the two sides. And in conjunction with the ILO, this project came about, and we have been doing it since. So 2017 is when we started. It's in its fourth year now. And it's been a very fascinating journey. Imagine an Indian diaspora member who is now a fully naturalized citizen of Canada and Europe, facilitating a dialogue between EU and India. Could that be a better swan story?
It sounds like a perfect role and responsibility within that now.
It's a very, very honorable position to be in, and I'm so flattered.
Excellent. And if we're getting into a bit of the detail on the policy here, how do you kind of envisage the future relationship between India and the EU on migration topics?
Gosh, there's so many things that come to mind, Glenn. The relationship between EU and India is so broad and so immense. It's also one of the longest and historical diplomatic relations that we have between EU and another member state. I believe it's now in its 56th or 57th year. And what we see as of last year is the EU and India even going deeper and deeper into a stronger, more principled relationship with the world's two largest democracies, human rights, values agreement, value alignment. So there's so much that's happening at the moment. Everything from foreign policy and security cooperation to defense to environmental standards to water management, waste management, energy, renewable energies. India is a leader in solar energy and the Solar Alliance. So there's just so much happening. In that, what I'm really fascinated to talk about with you today is the component on the people-to-people connectivity and the migration and mobility, because none of this happens. None of this happens without the people component to it. And we need to be able to keep that in mind always, especially in a time when we're becoming so virtual in nature, that there are human beings behind all of this. So what's most important and most exciting to talk about is the the dimension between Europe and India, where we have a skill shortage in Europe. We have a situation where we have ageism. We have a lot of population growing older. We have many individuals who feel like there is a shortage of the labor needs in the country. And as a result of that, within the EU, we have a lack of medical doctors, a lack of engineers, we have a lack of masonries, we have many of these, what are solely considered medium to low skilled labor are in short supply. And India, having an abundance of that, having approximately 65% of its population as working age, abundance of skills supply, it seems like the most perfect partner to be able to meet that need, doesn't it? So
absolutely.
In my opinion, the future is really going to be about trying to develop this relationship, about trying between the Europeans and the Indians. How can we bring supply those skill shortages through mobility agreements, labor partnerships, but it was also at the same time to think about other topics that are relevant to both sides, such as, for instance, we have the high-level dialogue on migration and mobility between EU and India. We have the common agenda on migration and mobility. Student mobility comes out as a very big issue and something that is growing very quickly. Students from India are highly sought after. They are extremely well dedicated and educated citizens of their countries, great ambassadors of the culture of India and the population that is so well established. When you talk about their intentions when they come to new host countries, they're strongly contributing. For example, did you know that the Grana Padano cheese, the Parmesan cheese that we all love to enjoy from Italy, is actually made by the hands of Sikh and Indian farmers and agricultural workers? So, those are the kinds of things that we have been really trying to encourage through our project, to be able to keep in mind that India and Europe have a long-standing relationship, but that relationship needs to continue, and that needs to continue in a very sustained way. So I really see us focusing more on labor mobility partnerships between Europe and India to meet that skills gap. I see us being able to even work on things such as crisis management. For example, with the COVID situation at the moment, what we're seeing very clearly is that countries need to be able to gather together and have a cooperation framework so that we don't have a us versus them mentality. And so with India being the pharmaceutical supplier of the world, it's in Europe's best interest to make sure that we have that partnership in place and that we can rely on one another to be able to cooperate in times of crisis. And also, for example, another area that has been acknowledged in the EU 2025 strategy or roadmap that it's called last year is the need to streamline skills recognition. Okay, we have these labor mobility partnerships, they come to Europe or they come to India, but if their skills and their qualifications are not recognized, if they are not able to contribute their maximum potential, then those are missed opportunities for host societies. Those are missed opportunities for communities. So I really see that as the future. And it's ironical, again, that those are the same things and the same challenges that my father faced when he moved from the United Arab Emirates to Canada, is that inability to be able to implement his full set of skills.
And we have an opportunity coming up now, Zad. There's the EU-India summit, which is getting closer, almost upon us. So the possibilities on workforce issues, what do you see as the opportunities there, and how will this play out in your opinion?
So, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, and I certainly don't want to pretend like I have access to the inner workings of the European Commission and the European Council. But what I do suspect and what I have heard is that it's going to focus a lot on the development of talent mobility partnerships. And that's very much along the lines of what we just finished talking about, is the EU wishes to have rolled out its pact on migration and asylum last year, which focused really strongly on the role of member states in ensuring the comprehensive migration management in return, as well as readmission, but also irregular migration. And at the same time, a key component of that was promised that there would be a proposal for talent mobility partnerships. So we see that as a conversation coming up. Talent mobility partnerships, I suspect, will focus a lot on the neighborhood region. I don't see them touching upon India right away. But I think it's important for member states as well as the Commission to keep their experiences and the lessons they learn in these early stages on what could potentially be explored for the cooperation with India. And so I suspect what's happening in May, when we have Prime Minister Modi either coming virtually or physically to Porto under the presidency of the Portuguese Council, is that we will see a conversation about that. How can India be the supplier of EU's woes when it comes to pharmaceutical needs, when it comes to health needs, but also when it comes to skills shortages. And member states are already doing that. Finland, for example, last year organized a Future is Made in Finland virtual conference. Germany, for example, passed a new law last year that immigration law that extended the recognition, the possibility of qualified professionals from outside the EU to come to Germany. And so I suspect that this summit is going to be an extension of that conversation. France, for instance, has made proposals or has the proposal in place already between India that once their students graduate from French institutions, they can stay back for up to 2 years to study and to seek employment. So those are the type of things that I really hope the summit will take into account and keep talking about, because at the end of the day, both sides need one another and both sides benefit greatly from that cooperation. India itself is going through a revolution in its sense where it's making itself more independent. They've rolled out such programs such as Make in India and Skills India, and all of these programs, EU startups and foreign investment and direct investment are playing a key role. The EU share in foreign direct investment in India has almost doubled from 8 to 18% in the last decade. Foreign direct investment in stocks in India amount to about 68 billion in 2018, which is significant. And about 6,000 European companies are present in India with 1.7 million jobs and then indirectly almost 5 million jobs. So that talent partnership and talent and skills mobility corridor needs to be expanded, has so much more potential given the shared democratic values and belief system that both sides have. And I can only see an upside between EU and India. Of course, no one knows whether that geographical focus will certainly at this moment be sub-Saharan Africa, the neighborhood, but I would really urge that we keep the region of the Silk Routes in mind, because many of the countries, not just India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Iraq, have young populations that are skilled, that want and to do a better, create a better stock for their families and for themselves. And I think that's very important to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And I think it is, as you say, a tide that raises all boats, and mobility and migration are the cornerstones of economic growth, not just now, but way back into history. But if we can dig down a little bit, what are the kind of the barriers that we're seeing at the moment, Naozad, to prevent this happening?
Gosh, everything seems to be now about COVID, doesn't it? I was just in a very interesting conversation yesterday. And the sense I get is that the first and foremost topic on everyone's agenda, politicians and the citizens alike, is when are we going to be rid of this pandemic, this global pandemic? So I personally see that as a first barrier. We need to improve the vaccination rollout in Europe. We need to ensure that all individuals are vaccinated. The inclusion of refugee populations, the inclusion of immigrant populations needs to be primordial in every national strategy. I think that's important. Secondly, of course, the ensuring that the travel that we start seeing, which we're already starting to see, needs to be as inclusive as possible, because I'm afraid what I'm hearing already and reading already is that countries are beginning to roll out travel deals where they say things like, if you have the vaccine, you're free to come.
Right. Or
if you have the ability to quarantine for up to 1 week in a hotel of our choice and pay $2,000 or euros, then you are welcome to join and come to our country. The problem with that is that I fear it's becoming very exclusive. It's becoming very selective. And mobility, when we think about it, works best if it's as inclusive as possible. If we can ensure that all members of our community can travel and benefit from the economic virtues and benefits that travel and intra-border cooperation presents itself. So I think that's important. And I would see that as a barrier as well, is that as we start opening our economies, as we start to travel more, I don't want to see, and I hope not to see, this selective travel that, those of us who have had the pandemic, the vaccination can travel. And of course, then that becomes a question of age, that becomes a question of access to the vaccine, the ability to purchase the vaccine. But then you're also seeing, when you put that aside, a rising sense of populism and anti-immigrant sentiment.
Yeah.
We saw that in the Silk Routes, where very early last year, we were under the impression that the COVID vaccine was something that was brought upon by Islamic people through the Hajjs that they were doing into the continent as a way to infect the Hindu population. We see misinformation about how the migrant communities are being pointed at as the cause of the COVID vaccine and the pandemic. And that's the kind of thing that I certainly want to make sure that we push back on, because I think the most important thing is that information is key and accurate information is communicated. We also see an increased role of nationalist economy protectionist measures being put into place. For example, within the GCC countries, a privilege being made towards local populations and employment being granted to those who have citizenship over those who are immigrants. And I fear that that was something that took place last year, that also emerged after the global financial crisis, and always seems to emerge its head when the world is going through challenging times. But what's important to do is to ensure that we understand that all of these regions, the GCC itself, grew on the hard work and the backbone of migrant populations, not only highly skilled, but also very low skilled. And I say that under parentheses in air marks, because I feel like sometimes low skilled were exactly the type of essential workers that we needed last year when all of us shut down. So I see that as well as a barrier. And then last but not least, global migration politics will need to be able to have to push back on this restrictive trend. How do we create programs that ensure and continue to allow temporary and circular migration? How do we ensure that the seasonal workers that are so essentially needed by Germany for the upcoming asparagus season can continue to feed our tables? And all those are skills and talents that are essential. Increasingly, countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain are relying on skilled selective immigration policies. And I'm afraid that is something that may be counterproductive, because what we see today is that those skills that were most essential were typically those who wouldn't have got the high points that one needs to get into the immigration system. So my fear is really about those 4 points, is that how is that going to roll out? And my hope is, and I really do see some pushback from organizations such as ours, where we're trying to really encourage governments to think more comprehensively in our conversations with them. But I also see that very positively from across the Atlantic, in the United States, and the conversations that we have in Brussels with intergovernmental organizations like IOM, and even think tanks as MPI, that this is a conversation that is taking place and that there is attention being paid to it. So that is encouraging to see.
Absolutely. And I think it's great that you've been able to take us through some of the migration issues, the mobility issues, but also the background and what's happening, and underlining if it was necessary, which I think it should be clear. But it's great that we keep saying these things, that the importance of mobility and migration and increased dialogue and practical sharing, partnership and cooperation between the EU and India. So Naozad, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and insights, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
My pleasure, Glenn. Thanks for having me on.